Assalamualaikum, and welcome to another episode of the ISNET Pod. I'm your host, Sadaf Sajjad, Administrator ISNET. And today we will be focusing on a crucial aspect of the rapidly evolving space sector, that is space law and policy. Today, we are honored to have with us a very renowned figure in the space law community, Ms. Aisha Jagirani. I would like to introduce you that Ms. Jagirani is currently working as DG of the Department of External Relations and Legal Affairs at the Asia Pacific Space Cooperation Organization, APSCO. She has over 18 years of experience in the fields of international cooperation in space, space education and awareness, and space law and policy. Before joining APSCO, she was also part of Pakistan's National Space Agency, SUPARCO, and she has also been selected as the mentor for UN Space for Women. In today's episode, she will share her insights on the importance of space law and policy, particularly in the context of capacity building for countries in the OIC and Asia Pacific region. Aisha, thank you so much for taking out your time from your schedule and agreeing to be part of our podcast series.
Thank you very much, Sadaf. Indeed, it's an honor for me to have this podcast with you. And I'm really grateful to you for inviting me once again. And particularly, I'm looking forward to share very crucial and important information on the importance of the space law and policy with the member states of ISNET and to our listeners, and focusing on the whole Asia Pacific region. So I'm very excited today to have this podcast.
We are really excited and we look forward for today's discussion. So to start off, Aisha, if you can briefly provide our viewers an overview of how the concept of international space law started and what are some key principles.
Sadaf, if you allow me, I would be a little informal, and I understand that our listeners could be from various backgrounds. Maybe they are not all related to a space field. So maybe the listeners are from various fields and from various backgrounds. And therefore, when I, as a beginner, first time had an exposure of space law and policy, I was also a non-lawyer person at that time. But as through my journey in the space law and policy, when I learned the entire background and history of the space law, it was very astonishing. And I would like to share in the way that I learned. So we all know that when the first satellite was launched back so many decades ago in 1957, at that time, it was such an astonishing thing for the whole humanity, I guess. Everybody was so excited to just learn that we are now able to go into outer space. The stars that were only able to see from Earth, now we have an opportunity to go over there. So it was an exciting element all around the world. But in the international diplomatic community, and particularly at the governance and government level, there were huge concerns. And what were these concerns? They had the concerns for their security, for their national securities, for the security of the world, and they were concerned about the safety of the entire this technological development that was happening. And don't forget, it was the Cold War era at that time. So especially at the United Nations level, there was an immediate concern, and they immediately established an ad hoc committee to deal with this issue. And how to deal with this issue? First was they wanted to learn what are the technical things and challenges in it, and how to deal with them, how to make sure that all these new developments, launching of the satellites, would be safe and secure and would not create any kind of concern for the humanity, for the countries and nations. So they wanted to explore the legal aspects at that time. How can we create some laws, guidelines, rules, and regulations to make sure that this happens in the right way? And that is where the whole story started under the United Nations. And very fast, immediately, they came up with the first international space law treaty. And I'm not going to go into the detail of the ad hoc meetings and discussions, of course, the time is limited, but eventually, very fast, in 1967, they just had the first international space treaty. And that still is considered as the mother of the international space law. So this treaty in a nutshell was just to make sure that whatever activities we do in outer space, they are safe, they are secure, sure they are equitable to all the member states. All the countries around the world should have their right share to be open, to be independent, to work in a space, yet they should act in a responsible way, that they are not going to contaminate the outer space. They make sure the outer space environment is safe. And most importantly, they need to make sure that the activities do not cause harm or to challenge the security issues within the world. So this is how the whole concept is started. And if we have a couple of minutes, I would just give you
Yes, please.
a little more thread connecting to this thing. We generally in space law have international laws. We have guidelines from the United Nations General Assemblies and their offices, and also some soft laws. But I will focus on how the core international law developed after this. We only have 5 treaties in international space law, and they are the major international space law. And they also developed in a very organic way, I personally feel. So when we had the first treaty, immediately after that, of course, it was a kind of a very big competition between the USSR and the United States of America. And we all know that America then planned to send a person on the moon. That became another technological hype at that time. Now there started the whole excitement of sending astronauts in outer space. But yet the international community was again concerned. Okay, we are sending the astronaut, very wonderful thing technologically, but how about that during the launch, if this astronaut by accident falls into the territory of another country, and maybe a country that is not friendly to you, and we have to never forget the geopolitical environment at that time when all these treaties were being developed. So we come back on this thing, the international community under, again, United Nations, they were discussing that we need to make sure that we send astronauts, but they are not considered as spies. Rather, they should be given due protocol, safety, security, again, if they by accident on their way fly to outer space or on their return, they fall in any other territory. So with this concern, they immediately came with another international law, another international treaty. We call it rescue agreement. So just within 1 year, can you imagine, in 1967 we had the first international treaty, and in the second year we had this astronaut rescue agreement signed by the countries, and it became the second law. And after that, the whole race started, and there were gradually different other countries coming into space operations. And then it was a concern that it's not only about the astronauts. Launching a satellite, launching an astronaut was, even at that time, a very high technology thing, and the accidents were very common, especially the failures. And when there was a failure, it does not limit within your national boundaries. The satellite is launched, but in the midway, it can fall into the territory of another country. Imagine it falls on a population, damages the house, damages the life. So who is going to be responsible for this question? And this was, again, a very legitimate question and concern of the international community. And therefore, the third law that came as a treaty was the Liability Convention. It came in 1972, just within 4 years, because then we saw the operations in the space more frequent, launching of the satellites, development of some space probes, sending the astronauts. With this all, the probability of accidents also increased. And this is where the countries had to make sure that, okay, I'm a country, I'm not involved in any space operations, I have nothing to do with launching of the satellite. But what if you're my neighboring country and you are launching something, and that falls on me and damages my people or my property? You have to be liable for that. So with this liability convention makes sure that countries have a national responsibility, and they are liable to pay the damages if they are making harm or damage to another country. And therefore, it is such a wonderful thing. I'm not going to go into the details of the laws, don't worry. But one of the very beautiful things on this liability convention is that, let's say, if an accident happens in outer space, one satellite of one country, another satellite, they collide. There will be an investigation, and there would be an subject to the evaluation and evidences. Liability will be identified, who is responsible. But let's say if you are a country A and I'm a country B, you launch a satellite, and your satellite by default falls on my territory and damages my people. then it's an absolute liability. No reasons is enough to make sure to give you a margin that, oh, it just happened by accident, it was a technical fault, it was not intentional. You are absolutely liable. If your thing falls on my territory, damages my people, my property, then you do have to pay liability, no rescue or any way out from that. So that is the beauty. The international community made sure through the laws to make this whole thing safe and secure for even a common person if they get hurt or damaged by these space activities. And with this, again, very organically and beautifully, the concern was, okay, if you are a country A and I'm at country B, if a satellite falls on my territory, I need to know whose satellite is this, or whose object is this, whose space object is this that fall in my territory and damaged me. Somebody has to claim that object, right? So how do we claim? How do we know? In a space, there are hundreds of satellites or thousands of satellites at that time moving around. One object falls on the earth and damages something. How to identify whose object is this? And with this came the registration convention. So registration convention is for the countries to register their space objects, whether satellite, whether space probes or anything. If they are launching it, they have to register it. And for making sure that all these treaties and all these things are taken care, we do have an office under the United Nations called the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs that deals with all of these things. So they make sure that they are receiving the registration, they are making sure that these treaties are available and explained to the member states, they are explained about their liabilities and responsibilities. And I'm happy to share with you that since the first treaty in outer space, they have currently more than 112 countries as member of the treaty. And this shows a very strong support from all the countries that if 112 countries are agreed to abide by the first treaty of the space, which covers all of these areas in general. And roughly we have around between 77 to 75 countries for registrations and other treaties who are member of these all international space laws. This shows a strong support of the international community that they want to make sure the space activities are safe and secure, and they bring the benefits to the humanity, not the harmful effects. So with this, there were 4 treaties, and at the end, of course, there were again some ideas to go beyond the Earth and beyond the outer space to the moon and other celestial bodies, and the scope for exploration of outer space was expanding. And then there was a concern that since outer space is a common global thing, and every country has right on the global commons that we call, such as Antarctica, such as deep sea, we call them global commons, and every country need to have the benefits from the global common. So the last treaty, the agreement was initiated in 80s, somewhere 86 probably, came into effect, that if a country is going on exploring, let's say, moon or other celestial bodies, still they need to make sure the operations are good, safe enough, and then they need to involve the other countries and developing countries and make sure the benefits of the technological development or researches goes to all countries. And with this, we had the last treaty, or you can say the last law in this space, that was Moon Convention. So all of these 5 in a nutshell comprises the entire international space law. And yes, it's very interesting. And in the recent times, there is a lot of debate going on also that since the time and technologies are changing, do we need to bring some other new treaties? But so far, these treaties have served wonderfully, and we see space the way it is right now.
You rightly said.
I think it's already quite an explanation, right?
You wonderfully explained all the 5 treaties background, and I think it's very important for the audience as well to know the basics and the background of how all these treaties actually developed, why they developed. So thank you so much for giving us this detailed overview, because then I think it will lead us to our discussion further. So moving ahead, Aisha, we all know that increasing number of states are now involved in space activities, and the need for effective laws and policies, not just on an international level, but also on the national level, is, I think, becoming more and more apparently. So can you also give us an overview of the benefits of having national space law, especially for countries in the OIC and Asia Pacific region that are looking to enhance their space activities?
Sadaf, may I request you to repeat your question because somehow I had an interruption. I couldn't hear you clearly.
Actually, my question was that if you can give us an overview about the benefits of having national space law, especially for
Okay.
countries in OIC and Asia Pacific region.
Okay, if I get correctly, I would repeat for clarification. Now you want to understand what are the stakes for the governments to have the national space legislation, or why it is important for
Yes.
the countries or the region to now have the capacity in this. So
Like,
we understand
give
that.
us an overview about international space law, and I think you should also tell us more about the national space law as well.
Yes, yes, it's a very, I think, indeed, a very good question because we have to understand now space law and policy within our context that how as a country, as a space agency, as a space professional, now I should be concerned about the space law. So thank you for asking this question, and I'll find a way to connect it again in a very easy way. How do you relate? So let's say if you're a national space agency or a professional working in a national space agency, you're a government representative, or even just a professional or a student trying to get some education in a space. So how do you relate yourself with the space law and policy? How is it important to you? I believe we understand the context, how these treaties were developed. Now, for me, the most important question as a practitioner is okay, we have international treaties, we develop some very good laws, we make sure at the international level you have rules, regulations, guidelines to make sure space is secure, sustainable. But who is going to implement this thing? This is the question, right? To make sure something is happening, you need to implement. Laws are always subject to the application. So, according to the international space treaties, according to all these treaties that I mentioned you, the governments, the national governments are responsible to implement them. There's no international body that will implement these treaties. They are there to facilitate you to understand them. But the governments, the members who are members to the treaties, they are liable according to the international law to make sure that these treaties, these clauses are implemented. Now, with this just one answer, when the governments or nations are responsible or the members are responsible, how would then the second question would be how would they make sure that they implement these treaties? Of course, they need to develop their national laws accordingly. They need to have their national mechanisms or national agencies to make sure that they are party to the international treaties, but now they need to amend or to modify or to make a space in their national laws to ensure that if they have an international liability and responsibility to make sure their space activities are secure. If they are members to any of the treaty, they need to implement them domestically. For example, if you're a country, if you're launching a satellite, and if you're a member of a registration convention internationally, now you have a liability to register your satellite. So, how do you register your satellite? Somewhere in your national mechanism, you have to give this responsibility to some organization, some agency, that you will be responsible if you're manufacturing the satellite, if you plan to launch a satellite, you will register with United Nations. So you definitely have to develop your national mechanism. A second most common example in current context is that recently we see a lot of commercial activities in space. One of the common thing that every person uses is internet, satellite communication based systems, use internet banking and all that. So if you have a commercial supplier, entity or organization that want to do some commercial activities in a space, want to initiate a channel, a satellite channel, or launch a broadband service, or want to have some satellite-based communication services in your country. Now, who will allow them to have the right or the license to operate, and not just operate, but make sure they operate according to the international laws to make sure everything is secure and safe? Again, the national governments. So your government need to have your national legislation to write these regulations and rules and guidelines to facilitate operators, the commercial organizations, and give them licenses and make sure the right service goes to the people. So therefore, you need, and again in a nutshell, that you need national governments to act to implement these treaties, and this is where the national legislation comes in. And if I could continue from here, since we understand our regions, especially the OIC region, the ISNET member states, countries, and in general the Asia Pacific region. Except for a couple of countries in the Asia Pacific regions, we have most of them spacefaring countries. The spacefaring countries we call the countries that are now taking the initiative to be part of the space activities. Recently, we have more than 80 countries that are able to operate satellites. So imagine there are more countries that are using the applications. So we all, whether we desire or we do not desire, we are part of the space applications, we are part of the space activities. By using the satellite technology in your country, you automatically become part of these space activities. Doesn't matter if you don't want to launch satellites or you don't have the capability to launch satellites or manufacture satellites. It does not matter if you have plans to go on Moon or Mars. But still, if you have governance that uses the satellite system for communication purposes, for navigation purposes in your country, for providing remote sensing data, for applying in agriculture and urban management, you are using space applications. So you need national legislations or national agencies to make sure these activities happen in the right way. And that where we talk about that is where we talk about the capacity building of the professionals, the capacity building of the young generation. If you have your own professionals who are trained in the space laws, in the space policies, who understand the activities and the scope of the activities in your country, they will be better able to guide you what kind of legal framework you need in your country, right? But if you do not develop your expertise, your professionals in the space law and policy related matters, you will always have to hire the expertise from outside. Of course, these are good, they're experienced, but they would not have the in-depth knowledge and understanding of your landscape, of your systems, how your country works. So this is where I personally also realize that when we have our own professionals and experts developed, and when we focus on capacity building of our young generation to work and to learn about these important issues, that is where you will be able to have your own very good professional advisors to make sure your things are tailor-made, your national space legislation is tailor-made, suiting your own requirements, not just copied from another model, from a Western country or from another region. And not only just domestically, it would be very interesting to share with you that if your country and you're a member of these treaties, you also have a say on the development of the future space legislation or future international space law. And then if you have your own professionals and your own people trained in this thing, they would be able to go at the international platforms and make their due contribution. I don't want to go into the details again, but I currently want to share with our audience and listeners that recently, in the past 1 decade, space law has become a very hot topic, international space law. And why? Because of the so many developments. We want to establish colonies, we want to bring back the resources, we want to do mining on Moon and other celestial bodies. There are a lot of threats along with the challenges. But I also am part of some of the international meetings, especially of the United Nations. I attend these things as delegations. And I do realize this thing that the countries, especially Asian countries and space developing countries, most of the developing countries, they do not have due share that I really want to see, or the contribution in the development of the future space law. We see the discussions, we see the working groups working and discussing so many things, but we still, as region, as countries, are dormant. And we have to understand that if you really want to share your due share in space in future, you need to act now. And it is being said by one of the presenter in a very good conference. I still remember the quote, but I forget the name of the person. But he said in a conference, I think that if you want a space on Earth, you need to contribute to the activities in space, and you need to have a space in outer space. So in future, the nations who do not have anything in outer space probably would have nothing on space. This is the final thing in technology happening. We will be part of it, we want it or not, and therefore it is a best option to get involved in this thing and to learn how we can better contribute and better be part of this. Save your rights, I would say, by learning about the space law at right now at this point.
Very, very rightly said, Aisha. And you explained not only about the national space law, importance of national space law, but you also highlighted a very important point, that is the to raise awareness of existing frameworks governing outer space activities. And it is indeed very crucial to build capacity building in space law and policy, especially for space-faring nations in OIC and Asia Pacific. So thank you so much for highlighting this important aspect as well. Now, moving on to our next question, that is, how do international organizations support countries in developing and adhering to space regulations with context of capacity building?
Sadaf, I must say that you have in a very clever way organized these questions, because literally they relate from one thing to another in a very systematic way. Yes, so I think after my answer to the second question, that how we understand the capacity building need and roles of the government, with that context, I would move forward to the role of international organizations. Now, let me share this thing once again, that we understand the governments need to play the role, right? But we do understand the limitations. They do not have, in short, resources. These include all kind of resources, the financial resources. They do not have enough money to spend on every activity or to even develop professionals. They do not have the educational institutions even within their countries. This is a fact. In most of the countries in Asia Pacific region and OIC region, we do not have even single university providing a degree education program in a space law, or even having the training programs. So we do not have capabilities or support system within our countries, right? And the third most important thing, even if we have opportunities to provide degree education programs in the space law and policy, we do not have the ecosystem within our countries at the national level to support these young professionals to acquire jobs. And therefore, who would come to do a degree in a space law and policy if they see in their country there's no job opportunity? We should never forget the practical aspects. Yes, we understand the need. We understand there is a requirement, but who are the people that would go for this field? And it's one of the biggest issues. These things go again in a very systematic way, and they develop in parallel. The space activities has to develop in your country, and in parallel you need to develop your capacities in the space law and policy. If you have too many professionals in space law and policy, even if you start a degree program at an educational institution and you don't have any organizations or any private sector within your country to utilize that manpower, they would not be sustainable. And I think within few years you might have to finish the program. So with this context, now comes the international organization. Because under the international organizations, especially the intergovernmental organizations like ISNET, like APSCO, Asia Pacific Space Cooperation Organization, we have some other. Now, these organizations have the objective to pull up the resources together, to combine our resources together, financial resources, our technical resources, and our manpower together, and develop the need or support the capacity building in a space law. And therefore, these international organizations are currently playing very important role. It is very difficult for one country to work alone and develop their all technologies, putting their own money by themselves. It is very difficult for them to develop their professionals without interacting and cooperating with other regions and learning from their experiences. So to encounter these two things, international organizations are the answers, in short. And international organizations are the places where different countries come, they pitch in their finances together, and this is where they share and develop technologies together, they develop various applications and researches together in a space, and make sure that the space activities or development of a space is sustainable in their member countries and is growing greatly by learning together, by transfer of the know-how and knowledge among each other. So one very common example is, for example, in APSCO, we have China as our host country, and we have 14 other member countries. So let's say if one country has put enough money, enough time, enough experimentation to develop something. China is developing the International Lunar Research Station on the moon. And through the international platform, they can open up this opportunity to the other member countries, even though they do not have technological capability, but still they can be part of their team, they can learn. So we have this one example in APSCO that through ILRS, we are inviting all the member states of the countries to get involved into the researches on moon, on the samples of the moons that are returned from outer space, and to learn how in future they can develop technologies that can explore more and other celestial bodies. So number one, this helps greatly in developing the technology very fast and making your space program sustainable. Second, it provides a fast mechanism for capacity building, because then you are exchanging what you have learned. So, for example, in one country, if they have an educational institute that provides a degree program in some space application and satellite development in aeronautics or astronautics, including a space law and policy, then they might open up these educational opportunities to other countries. Now, separate other member countries do not need to establish their own universities or own institutions. They can utilize this thing, or they jointly can develop a program as a tailor-made degree education program or a training program. And this is where the international organizations are very effective, particularly capacity building, because it's also an area which is not very critical in terms of many challenges that we have in space. Not every technology is open to share, but capacity building around the world, everybody supports and everybody encourages. And the international organizations in this way play a very crucial role, I think, personally, and are very effective in capacity building. I have so many examples that I can share, but I understand that even within the ISNET, this is one of the core things that ISNET, I think, is proud of, to build the capacity of the member states. So this is where the international organizations comes in. And then from there, just one more minute to add up to this point and we can finish this thing here, that from the international organizations within themselves, we have then the regional organizations. So there are also international organizations, intergovernmental organizations, but their focus is more on the region. And to come up with an example, again, I would bring my own organization, APSCO, Asia Pacific Regional Space Agency focused organization. So this organization is now focusing on Asia and Pacific. And what is the advantage to have the regional organizations? Now, within a region, we understand that there are quite a lot of similarities in the socioeconomic patterns, geographical similarities, and also a kind of the development in a space that is happening within the region. If we take a broader or a bird view, it's more or less the same. So regions share a lot of common things, and therefore regions can work more closely together and understand each other's challenges and develop the technologies that are more relevant to their countries. For example, let's say if we take example of European Space Agency, working for the European countries with 22 members in Europe, and APSCO with 14 member countries. Now, if we try to find a thing that if we have to work, let's say, in urban management in Europe, maybe it's totally different than the urban management in Asia Pacific region. The cities are much bigger. The population is much, much bigger in Asia Pacific region. Therefore, what kind of tools, technologies, researches we need in Asia Pacific regions are different than the countries in Europe. In the same way, if we need to work on the governance model to use these space technologies to have the governance systems for better governance, and then the models in Asia Pacific regions are different than the European countries, or for that matter, the African countries. And this is the reason recently we have seen emergence of the regional organizations more. Now we have, first we had the ESA, European Space Agency, working for a long time. We have now APSCO, we have ISNET focusing on OIC region. We have now African Space Agency concept. Recently, the Latin Space Agency has also been established to focus on South American countries. And we also see in the Arab states, in the Middle East, UAE taking lead to establish Arab Space Cooperation. So this is effective, this is more effective and brings the benefits more quickly than the broader international organization. Therefore, the regional organizations are effective and very important in terms of expanding the cooperation in this space. I hope I have been able to give you a picture of the importance of the international organization.
Also, you have given us picture by providing us again, giving us examples, and so it's easy for the audience to understand as well. And I agree with you that we need to actively participate in these IGOs or regional organizations, and basically need to pool up our resources so that we can have our say, as you said, in the future of the regulations related to space.
Yes, and with the context of the space foreign policy also, Sadaf, because that was our main topic. Actually, IGOs or international organizations are not just there to help you pull up the resources. Also, when we are together, if one person raises a voice, is one person. If a group is standing together for a cause, it is more effective. We all know this thing as a social thing, right? So it's the same as the thing with the countries. If they work alone, they have to put exceptionally hard effort to achieve something. But if they work together, whether technological side or capacity building, it's easier. But also in the context of a space foreign policy, if a region is raising their voice about their rights at the international platform, especially at the United Nations levels, it is more heard. It would be given more importance rather than one country saying one thing. And in the context of a space foreign policy, again, I would say the national space, the international space thing is currently, again, a very hot thing, and a lot of deliberations, discussions are going on related to various contemporary challenges that we are facing in space activities. And the discussions are going on. We have to be part of it. So better to be part of it as a group under an international or regional platform. If we raise a voice as OIC region, it is going to be definitely heard by others.
Totally,
yes,
totally on this point. Aisha, to conclude, let's discuss the broader impact of space law. Can you tell us how does the legal framework governing outer space contribute to the economic and the social development of the country?
So yes, again, the last question, but very relevant. With this whole thing, again, we can sometimes think as a person or as layman, why we all need to do this thing, for what reasons, right? Apart from the benefit. But as I have mentioned somewhere in my conversation, it is inevitable for you, whether you are an individual, a professional, agency, national space agency, or a government for that matter, it is totally inevitable to be away from space activities now. And currently, you would be amazed. Just a few days back, I was reading something and I learned that last year in 2023, again, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, this is the international body that compiles the launch of the space objects. Remember, I mentioned you during the registration convention that there is an international organization that counts on who's sending how many satellites in space. So this is the organization. And last year alone, there were more than 2,500 satellites launched. And in their annual report of UNOSA, they did mention this thing that from 1957, when the first satellite was launched, until 2012, per year, the launch of satellites or a space object was between 100 to 150. But just from hundreds in last one decade, every year the launches are more than 2,000. It just started hundreds and now in thousands. And just compared to last year in 2022, they were less than 2,000, and this year is 2,500. So the number of space objects the way they are being launched, it is going to multiply. And the future predictions are that in 1 year, there might be 5,000, 10,000 satellites launched. Now, already under one of the international organizations known as International Telecommunication Union, ITU, that is the organization that gives you orbital slot for communication satellites where to launch. They have some companies, even private companies, that have already put up their request for registration of mega constellation. Mega constellation means a big, huge group of satellites, small satellites launched for a purpose, especially for communication and to provide satellite internets and all. And can you imagine, these constellations include hundreds of thousands of satellites together in one constellation. So just for a moment, for a second, take a pause and imagine how your outer space is going to look like. When you have so many objects, you need to have some arrangement to make sure they are not going to create a disaster, not only in outer space, but on Earth because of their mishandling. It's just a simple example, as in that you have a bridge in your city that connects two places, but your traffic is going to raise 100 times. So without planning, without paying attention, that bridge would collapse, right? It would not be able to sustain the traffic over there. That is the same thing in a layman terms with this space. We need to make sure that this is doable. We can send, no country can stop another country to send the satellites. International law says that everybody has a freedom to explore the outer space. So how do we make sure? So again, we can make sure these things by working together. The space commercial entities are growing so much so that not only the space objects are increased, these are increasing for a reason. And the reason is that recently, in last 5 years only even, the space economy, that is a commercial benefit from space activities, has gone beyond $7 billion per year. Even it was surprising that during the COVID period, when entire world economy was going down, space sector was the only sector which was still growing in terms of the economic benefits. So now your country's activities, not only the regular government activities, your major economic things will be depending on space services, your banking sectors, your communication sectors, your online educations, your online working from home. The future is more based and dependent on technology. We cannot deny. And the major technology is coming through satellites and through the exploration of these all satellites and other technologies. And we all have to play our due role. If we as governments want to take benefit of this space economy, not just on satellites for providing services, but also utilize our country to benefit from the growing space economy, to be part of the whole socio-economic development spectrum of the world, we need to make sure that we have laws and regulations that attract these investors. I tell you another fact that in Asia Pacific region, we don't have our own capabilities to support the commercial companies here. So there's a region, this is a huge region in terms of number of people we have, the population, the greatest large land area that covered is by the Asia Pacific region. Also the major socioeconomic problems we have in this region. And where you have more problems, the solutions are needed in that area, right? And space applications provide solutions. Doesn't matter you launch a bunch of the satellites. If you don't have their application on Earth, they are just piece of metal roaming in space and nobody will be interested. Why space and satellites are important? Because they have their application on Earth for us people. So benefiting from it is through developing your economies, being able to contribute to the space economy, get your share from the space economy, develop your investors, develop your local industry to contribute on this. And the only way to do is, number one, through having a legal framework within your countries that can support establishment or increasing these agencies or companies. And second is to create an awareness that there is a potential, there is a space economy, there are space activities, you can be part of it. We have, as governments, the framework that can help you to be part of it, and we are going to support you on this thing. So this is how the whole importance in future, it is a space and a space technologies, which will be evident in every country, everywhere, and will be available even in a globalized way. And then we need professionals to deal with the mechanisms, providing frameworks, providing guidelines, policies, ensuring the activities are good for the person, are good for the country, good for a company, and globally they are good enough to make sure that everybody has their share. And these are to be done by laws, and we call them space law and policy. So space law and policy comprises everything: the international space law, the national space legislations, and also the commercial sector that is developing. They also come under the national space legislation. And therefore, it is extremely important and relevant in current scenario. Thank you.
For sure, Aisha, you have highlighted some very important facts and figures that I think reiterates the importance of space foreign policy. Thank you so much, Aisha, for sharing your insights on this topic. I wish we had more time and discuss further about space foreign policy, the latest developments. But since we are short of time, I think we can conclude today's podcast. And your discussion today, the discussion today reminded us that the future of space exploration relies not just on the technology, but very much on the governance frameworks that guide our actions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It was amazing to talk with you. I'm sure that your listeners would be able to gain at least one or two things from my talk. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this session.
It was a very enlightening discussion, and to our listeners, we hope this episode has shed light on the significance of space law and policy and inspired a new perspective on international space cooperation. Till then, take care and have a very good day. Goodbye.